Hey everyone, this is Mateo from Semper Metallum. Earlier this week, I had the awesome privilege of getting to speak with Zoe of Bandcamp Daily. She's the editor over there, and we had a great conversation about how Bandcamp is helping to push heavy music forward, some of the underground rising bands you have to hear, the importance of journalism and curation in a world that is run by AI and algorithms, especially in the streaming age and the music industry, and just overall had a blast. And she was great to talk to, and I'm very thankful to have had that opportunity. So hope you guys enjoy. So first, how did you get involved with Bandcamp, and what is your role with Bandcamp? What is it that you're contributing to Bandcamp specifically?
I saw a posting while I was in New York City and I was at Revolver that they were looking for someone for their editorial team, and they were looking for more metal coverage because metal is one of the most popular genres on the site. Whereas on other sites, like when I was at Pitchfork and stuff, there wasn't much of a metal audience. On Bandcamp, some of our best performing stories and the ones people really identify with are with, everything from doom gaze to tech death to cosmic death metal. So I was really excited to kind of get that opportunity to come on board. So what I do, I take pitches and edit stories from our contributors who come up with basically everything you see on the site except, the columns and whatnot. And I also handle the new and notables that you see on the front page. I do a lot of coordination with our artists and labels team to find new music and to connect with folks who are just coming aboard the site, because more artists are coming to Bandcamp every day. I always tell people, if Bandcamp is the internet record store, then our job is basically we're the folks at the record store who are hand picking records that you might like based off what you're into, but also stuff that we feel like isn't getting a ton of attention that deserves to be on your radar.
I think Bandcamp also serves a really cool space, especially in kind of the internet economy of music, if you will, for lack of a better term, where Spotify, for example, they kind of have certain genres they push a little more than others. Apple does the same thing. Bandcamp kind of focuses more on more underground, more niche, independent artists. And I think that's a really needed space. And I think that's something that Pitchfork kind of does well as well. I know you mentioned Pitchfork before. Yeah. That same sort of energy there in terms of always looking for the next thing, I think is very important. And it's awesome that there's a space like that. That is the way Bandcamp is.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you said about, really focusing on the underground. One of my mentors at Pitchfork actually was Brandon Stossy, who handled a lot of the metal coverage and the planning. And one of the things he taught me was really to just focus on the community and focus on the artists who are really trying to put themselves out there and do something original. And some of the most impassioned art is coming out of these underground metal communities. And I think, thanks to bands like Death Heaven, folks are starting to get into metal who might not normally get into it, which is awesome. That we're breaking down all these barriers. And I feel like that's really where Bandcamp thrives, is that we let the community drive it. We kind of just see, what are the records that people are commenting on? We get stuff from press agencies and whatnot, but I would say the vast majority of our stuff is just found by looking around the site and, digging through the stacks, just like everyone else.
That's awesome. What do you think the importance of curation and journalism is in the music landscape, especially when it comes to heavy music nowadays, with a lot of platforms being flooded with algorithmic playlisting and AI recommendations, and kind of having that, more human voice, but also just that specific voice looking for those underground artists?
I think we can all agree that it's totally easy to have access to new music. The problem is there's just so much of it. And of course, with metal, I feel like, it's tricky because so many things people come to metal for different things, right? Mm-hmm. Some people really like like a recent example being Cookie Monster vocals. Some people really like that. Some people find it completely abhorrent. But you have this broader kind of community of all these different types of style that I feel like what it is identifying the things that people really care about and trying to look past the algorithm and again, follow the fans, follow our community. We all listen to so many records in a given day, and everyone at Bandcamp, a lot of us are artists or just are really passionate music fans. So again, we try and just bring that personal element that I think is missing from a lot of algorithmic streaming. Thinking back to those days of music where, you ask your friends what they're listening to, your friends who are always going to shows, you go from there. And I think that that's really a nice, refreshing alternative to the kind of overload we have now. Like, we also introduced our clubs recently, our Bandcamp clubs, and one of them is a metal club run by Jay Bennett, who's a killer metal journalist who's done a lot of stuff for Revolver and for us. And he picks something new every week. Sometimes it's a grindcore album. Sometimes it's like black metal. Sometimes it's hard rock or stoner metal. And he's, interviewed everybody under the sun. He's interviewed Tool and all these folks. So he really has this wide range. So it's like having this really cool friend who recommends you one record. We can just go on a playlist that regenerates every day, and you have nothing. There's so much new music, but like, what is actually worth your time and your money? Because it's also about supporting the artists at the heart of it. Like, we want you to find music and really connect with it, and from there you can connect with the artist, with other fans, and then when somebody that bought the record you just bought buys it, you can see what they got. So it's kind of like interesting because it's like editorial is really just an extension of that. And it's really an honor to be kind of entrusted and trusted to recommend stuff because, $8 to $10 in inflationary times, if you just put that $10, you can really like make an artist's day. And that can also really lead to a lot of momentum that goes elsewhere. So it really all starts with that human element, I think.
I agree. I think that's one of the most important elements of music journalism and like curation and kind of what Bandcamp's doing is just that human element. Like you said, it's very much like word of mouth where, let's say someone lives in a small town somewhere, doesn't know a lot of people that are into that specific, genre of music. They can go online and they can see everyone on Bandcamp recommending metal music or underground music. And it's all real humans with their real opinions, sharing what they love about a song. And I think that goes a long way. And I think still to this day, with all the algorithmic playlisting and recommendations, I think that holds more weight to the average person who's actively seeking it out.
Yeah, 100%. As you were saying that, I was thinking about Knocked Loose, which is a band I've had the pleasure of getting to see their rise. I remember when I was at Revolver, and I'd heard laugh tracks and I was like, whoa, what is this? And over time, we saw they had a huge following on Bandcamp, and we were able to see, firsthand, like with their fan community and how active how the comments people were leaving on this music. And, giving that little push, sometimes a label owner or a promoter will see that and be like, holy shit. There are these artists that I think that everybody can agree. I mean, Knock Loose or Bring Me the Horizon, and now they're like a headlining act.
Yeah, they're huge now.
Yeah, but they all started from the underground, and it was really just that passion for it. And I think that's ironically what a lot of labels are realizing now. You can also see it in Turnstile. It's just like a really good way to strike back against these people always say rock is dead and stuff. And I'm like, nope, you have examples right here. Rock and metal has never been stronger between Knock Loose and Spirit Box, Turnstile. And there's so many bands right now that are just kind of, I think, emerging from that whole space. And it's really great to be able to see firsthand how the underground can really be represented in this higher level on a very genuine level, because I really respect how Knocked Loose are just completely open. They're always pushing the boundaries.
And I think what's really important about those bands in particular, especially like Knocked Loose and Turnstile being big, they've made it clear that everything is still about the art. It's about the community. It's about the music itself. And you see that with, Knocked Loose is playing literally 10,000 cap venues now, but they'll still on like every tour do a random surprise 200 cap room somewhere in a basement, like they're still doing those shows. Turnstile's done multiple free shows on their tour. Like they're all about the community and the music. And I think that speaks volumes compared to a lot of blow-ups, I guess, in the past, you could say, for a lot of bands. Like I feel like the sense of community is a lot stronger now than it ever has been.
And it's also crazy to see that community reaching new audiences like Title Fight. Title Fight, keeps like connecting with younger audiences that were like probably in elementary school when Shed came out. And it's incredible to see, like, I think that's one of the reasons that gets them. It's like people see how people go wild during their shows and how invested they are in this music, and it makes them want to be part of that community. And yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting too with a band like Title Fight, for example. They haven't been around for a long time now. They haven't done anything. They never broke up, but like they haven't done anything. So just in their own absence, that I feel like that really especially shows that there's a community that's searching for that type of music, that's yearning for that type of music. And I think that really goes a long way, because as they've risen to popularity, so many other artists that are actively putting out music and are actively touring are also getting lifted with that same sort of tide. So I think that's really important.
Oh yeah. I mean, the labels play a huge part in that. One of my favorite new labels, Blue Grape Music, which is by some and they're just putting out so much good rock, dude. I mean, it's a great time to be a rock fan and a metal fan, but especially a fan, I feel like, of hardcore. I feel like hardcore is in its
hardcore is having a moment right now for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of like hardcore, I feel like hardcore has gone in a very different direction than it has in the last 30 years. It's very much expanding out into all these different subgenres and styles, or hardcore influenced genres and micro genres, as Bandcamp puts them a lot of the time. What do you think the impact that what you do with Bandcamp has had on those types of artists? For example, an artist like Chat Pile or Portrayal of Guilt, artists that don't fit into any of the predefined boxes of metal and have a very unique fan base and very unique sound and direction. And how has that helped them, give them a career and platform? I mean, Chat Pile's now touring with Fleshwater and selling out dates like crazy. So just kind of go into about how Bandcamp's kind of propped that up.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that a lot lately after listening to that Fleshwater record. I've noticed an influx of bands, especially on labels like Death Wish, that are embracing that kind of genre blurring, like a little post-metal, a little shoegaze. And I feel like partially that might be like downwind of the internet, because a lot of bands, I feel like, have like grew up with access to all this different kinds of music. You never want to stay in one place for too long, and everyone wants to mix it up. But I just feel like there's this broader, ripple effect of all these different genres mishmashing. And I feel like Bandcamp is sort of like, you can totally see that when you go through, just going to the bottom of a given album and seeing all the tags that people are putting, shoegaze and electronic. And then you see Chat Pile doing similar things. I think that they're a great example of bands that like don't fit into any category, and that's
not at all.
what gives them a home on Bandcamp. Because we always on the editorial team talk about things being very Bandcampy, and it's like if they're going outside the boxes, like really shaking things up, defying any genre concepts ideally, and is reflective of this new mode of listening where we're just kind of more interested in like unified concepts and just that universal language of aggression. That band Candy, I remember the lead singer once said that, EDM, rave music and hardcore and metal aren't too different because they're both body music to move your body to. Yeah. But I do find that interesting that we're seeing like more of that industrial stuff leaching over. And I'm curious if that is like because of our listening habits or because of like what generation of artists, kids that grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010s.
I mean, I just saw Candy earlier this year. So I can speak to how they've kind of blended like grindcore and electronic music, and it's really interesting. It's a unique sound. I'm seeing more artists do that sort of like blend. No one's doing it in the same way, but they're all kind of mishmashing and blending that. And I think part of that, you have the people who grew up listening to the 90s music, who are like the generation after those who were listening to them when they were coming out. So it's like they've grown up with them having been like 10, 15-year-old albums by that point. But then you also just have the internet, and you have everyone's listened to a million different genres of music and taking inspiration from a lot of different things, like you said. But I think what's also interesting is you have labels like Closed Casket Activities, who were very much like a strict, really heavy, rougher production, just kind of that gnarlier sort of metal sound. And now they're expanding into bands like Fleshwater or Soulblind. You're starting to see just there's a lot more creativity that's getting platformed, and artists aren't afraid to take risks, especially nowadays in the age of social media. And I think labels are finally starting to see that, and they're letting artists take risks. And so then when you have a platform like Bandcamp, where all it takes is someone going, yo, this is sick, and then a bunch of people check it out, and then that crosses over into Spotify streams and social media follows, and eventually, if they're lucky, tour attendance and whatnot. And I think that is a ripple effect that goes a long way. And I think creativity in music, especially now with the rise of AI and whatnot, I think especially now having that creativity also makes things more human sounding. And I think that's something that people are actively searching for in the current moment.
Oh, totally. To your point about really rallying around artists that break all the rules and have all these influences, one of our things, my favorite things we do at Bandcamp Daily is Big Ups, where we ask artists to recommend stuff that they like on Bandcamp. So of course we had to hit up Chatpile, what they recommended. It's like everything from vaporwave to splits with obscure Kansas City bands, egg punk mixed with chain punk, Devo leaning art punk stuff. I mean, they listen to everything, and every member brings their own taste to things. So that's even better, because a lot of times people will go through artist big ups, because sometimes like artists are the biggest advocates. I mean, we trust artists so much, and we know because like the tours they put together. So that's one of the best things, and that's one of the reasons it's so great to work with a lot of these artists, because it's like a pay it forward thing, and everyone benefits.
And I think also what's interesting about Chatpile recommending who they recommended, you mentioned kind of a split with a Kansas City band. I think Bandcamp is kind of like each city's local scene has a platform now on the internet and a space that anyone can access. And so a lot of artists, they love to keep in touch with artists from their area, from their local scene they grew up playing shows in or are still actively playing shows in, and lifting them up as well as they're growing. And I think that's why you see the rise of certain scenes becoming more popular nation, if not internationally wide. I think it really just there's a sort of energy to a local scene and a local DIY show that Bandcamp very much props up. And I think that's important because nowhere else is really focusing there.
Yeah, the small scenes are really where it's at. One of our craziest stories recently was about, the different scenes like in the past year, Leeds and the
Leeds hardcore's having a moment right now.
Yeah, and Ireland, stuff's popping off in Ireland, really all over the world. And what's great is that a lot of times we can learn from artists. Sometimes when they're sending stuff, they'll be like, and this is part of a bigger scene. And we'll be like, oh, what do you mean by that? And then find out there's so many different artists in these local scenes. Again, people are drawn to that human community and the genuine nature of the art that's coming out of there. So we really do our best in our, scene reports to really show all over the world, all the different corners of people making awesome music. And it's really dope to just see that in spite of everything and in spite of all of the cost of living that makes it hard for artists to find gigs and, the relentlessness of touring, that you have these communities that really celebrate music and they see it really important. And I mean, the metal community being the chief example, because metalheads are so passionate and we have a sense of pride in our local scenes, And
I think also one thing I want to point out before we move on from this subject is, for example, with Chatpile, mentioning artists and you bringing on artists consistently for the big ups. It's not really a genre. It's not even a micro genre. It's more just like a thing. I'm a musician, so I've kind of noticed this as well. There's you have your bands. There's these certain bands that just people that are musicians or are in bands always love to tout because they're just a little bit weird. They're a little bit avant-garde. They don't get necessarily the usual sort of reach, but bands start talking about them, and then other people who are in bands then start talking about them, and then they kind of have their own ripple effect. I think a good example of that would be like Meshuggah in the 90s. I mean, every metal guitarist ever or drummer ever loves Meshuggah. And like, if you were to mention Meshuggah to the average person, a lot of people will go, what? But they're huge, but it's all bands. It's all just different people who are in bands that support them and have supported them the entire time. I think you have people like Loathe who are doing a lot of cool stuff that every musician that I talk to about them, they're like, oh, dude, their drummer is so insane. Or,
Oh, yeah.
And I think you're seeing that too with some of the tours that are coming out now. And I think it's especially cool with what Knocked Loose and Turnstile, for example, are doing on their latest tours. Knocked Loose, I saw last year play with Loathe, Speed, and Show Me the Body. And Show Me the Body is kind of an outlier on that lineup for sure. And just watching them, they were incredible. But from what I was gathering, I was like, okay, everyone in here that's getting it, they're recognizing just kind of more so the musicianship and the talent on display rather than like, because it's not their normal type of music. And when you hear Knocked Loose talk about why they brought Show Me the Body on tour, it's like, because they rule. They really just enjoy their music. They're doing something super creative. And I think that platform is now, with some of these artists like Knocked Loose, that platform for those types of artists is also getting bigger. So you're starting to see more creative bands like that. For example, Chat Pile is one of those bands, as well as more of a band sort of band, for lack of a better term.
Totally.
But I think it's especially cool to see Bandcamp giving platforms to artists like that, and then artists are using that platform to prop up some of those bands that maybe wouldn't have necessarily gotten as much love otherwise, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly why we started it, because it's like, yeah, a lot of musicians work together. And a lot of times, like, somebody who drummed on this record is like in a really sick band, or like you toured with this band way back in the day and they don't get as much attention as they should. I think that that's really one of the biggest pros of Bandcamp, is just that everyone's welcome at Bandcamp. You know, if you value music, you value creativity, you love music, you know, when people find us, I think they're really drawn to the fact that it's like, yeah, for people that, you know, when you really appreciate music and you also, I think, have an understanding, especially when you're a musician, that musicians deserve to be compensated and respected for their art, because it's bold to break the rules and to make a career out of that. And I think that metalheads are great at doing that. I think they understand the importance of like keeping it real in that sense, and really, because we all need each other in that sense.
I think it's especially important now more than ever. You have the idea of ownership has changed in a lot of ways in the last even like 5 years, really, since, you know, a lot of companies have switched over to subscription models and whatnot. So you can have like entire libraries at home, but you're really renting licenses when you get these subscriptions. Or if you go and purchase a movie digitally, for example, you don't actively own it. You're owning a license because you're not downloading a file. I feel like the perception of music and the value of buying music has also changed quite a bit, especially with the age of streaming, where you can pay $20 a month and have every song ever. And Bandcamp being very much more of a support the artist, buy the album, you get the MP3 files. It's the last bastion of like an older sort of format where you did buy albums. And it's also, for example, you guys did the Bandcamp Fridays for a while.
Today's Bandcamp Friday, actually.
Today's cool. It's still going on. Bandcamp Fridays, where you waive all the fees and you encourage everyone, hey, buy these albums. You know, some artists choose to do pay what you want models, but like, hey, buy these albums. And I think that's a very important thing. And I think Bandcamp Fridays especially, I remember seeing so many bands, talking with so many bands back in like 2021 where they weren't able to do shows, how that saved their career so many times, just because they were like, hey, if you support us, go buy our album on here, you actually get the files. And on top of that, Bandcamp having a storefront for physical merch. I know some bands will just use Bandcamp instead of having an official website, just because they can put all their merch and tour dates and recordings and everything on there. It's kind of a great all-in-one catch-all sort of platform. How do you feel that Bandcamp has kind of continued that and pushed that forward and adapted to that sort of buying physical and buying digital, but actually owning sort of model?
Music is something that is really special. And when you're buying music, I think it's kind of solidifying a connection, because you'll always have it. I always think, well, what if there's a mass internet outage, or, you know, God forbid, it's like that, you know, something is removed from services. As you say, it's a very kind of a precarious situation. And I feel like it's, I think, really nice to have something tangible and something that you can, give to another person. Like, hey, you want to listen to this? And like the days we used to have mixtapes, we went and took that idea and developed it into playlists. So now, if you buy records, you can take stuff from your collection and make a playlist of it. And that's a way we found that was, a way to take that experience of developing a collection and sharing it with other people. That kind of slow person-to-person approach is, I think, really how we kind of look at the concept of playlist, because music is, important. Well, that's an understatement. I mean, music is a really special thing. And when you show your support for artists, you're also giving back and ensuring that they can continue to make art and continue to keep touring. And it's kind of, again, a community effort. I just love that feeling when I add an album into my collection and I can look at it and just decide, like, what do I want to listen today? And, listening to an album or an EP its entirety, first of all, underrated, because many of them are like 30 to 45 minutes. So it's not that much of an ask. It's just kind of great to be able to come back to it and know that you have that stuff and that you can access it whenever you want. I can't stress enough how great it is that just by, purchasing music, you're also connecting with other folks who bought music, and it's opens up a way to kind of form those relationships with other people and really keeping it local, keeping it interactive in that sense. I mean, that's the most important thing, I think, really kind of respecting art on its own terms and understanding that when you're purchasing something, that's a support, and that's, what allows art to keep flourishing.
I very much feel like there's a different connection you develop with your music when you physically own the item, or you actually it's yours. No one's going to take it from you. I'm sitting right next to over 100 CDs. And I've also got some records on the wall too, but the audio quality is higher when you own music to begin with, as opposed to streaming. But then also when you're able to physically hold it, you have the artwork, the booklets. There's a lot of context that you don't get with streaming. And I think you develop more of a connection to it. Like some of my earliest memories, I can remember having an album that my parents had or whatever, and then just going through the booklet and the jewel case, and I can vividly remember some of those, and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's the album that has this inside of it. That was cool, I think that goes a long way. I feel like people today don't necessarily have that understanding unless they are actively getting into that, sort of collective mindset. So I think it's cool to see, there is a place on the internet that still is supporting that and has that sort of mindset to an extent.
Yeah. One thing I think about a lot is, that mindset and how, for better or worse, the state of the world is that a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily see music that way. But I think you can't shake your fist at people and tell them you better do this, because they'll realize it on their own, through the discovery, and as you get invested in art. And I feel like that's the way that people come to Bandcamp and why we're able to do it on our own terms. Maybe not everybody appreciates music in that way, but there's enough of it. And if every 1 out of 10 people bought an album instead of streaming it, it really has a ripple down effect.
Kind of going back as well to an extent, as a professional curator and kind of scout of sorts for rising talents, what are the most exciting innovations you're seeing right now on Bandcamp? What are some rising microgenres you've really been getting into, and just some artists we should look out for that you want to see get more love just in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've noticed there's a lot of post-punk creeping into metal these days. Not so much Depeche Mode, New Ordery per se, but the Dutch scene, bands like Floating and Brutus. You're seeing a lot more of that kind of murky post-punk sound. And I feel like gothic stuff in general, I don't think we're going back towards synthwave yet, but I do think you're seeing a lot more bands that are really kind of channeling maybe that weird period of not quite punk, but not quite new wave, that kind of middle ground in a sense. I also think, this is crazy, I was just talking to a colleague about it. I think that we are seeing, a new metal, and I think it's it's in many ways redemptive, because it's a smarter way, bands like Fleshwater that are taking kind of our preconceived notions of new metal and being actually, like, people were, I think, sold it short, that there's a smart, way to do this, but still in a fun way. I definitely think Fleshwater onto really cool stuff. Interesting kind of grunge gaze intersections, like this band Shallow Water, but they're not so much metal. They're more kind of a doomy, dark folk metal crossover. Just in general, I definitely see a trend towards incorporating more electronics into the recipes. But also today I noticed somebody sent to me a band from Portland, and it was like frog metal. And there's another band called Frog Lord. And now I'm starting to wonder if there's like a frog scene that I've completely missed out on. But I would put that definitely lower. I think the lead development, definitely the embracing of post-punk and atmospheric elements. I mean, heck, you look at a band even like Sleep Token, who aren't on Bandcamp, but I think that kind of gothic grandeur is coming back in a metal. But you're also just seeing like really extreme stuff, and I think again, Knock Loose being the paragon example now that they've taken off. Insofar as other bands on the rise, I've been digging this band Still in Love. They're out of the UK, and they're a super group featuring members of Bring Me the Horizon and other bands, like former members. And that's like a really nice, cool, old metalcore, but a little more gristle to it. And that's really good stuff. I also just have to say that between Perturbator and Author and Punisher, we are seeing, I think, industrial metal with kind of that sort of feeling where it's like you're in a Twin Peaksy disco with like billowing smokestacks, like kind of a god fleshy sound. That's coming back. So just a lot of, maybe it's the climate we live in, but it's just a kind of dystopian vibes, which I think is really cool.
Very much so. I think it has to do with the environment we live in. You see there's a trend called recession pop. Whenever things start to go bad economically, pop music has this like very like upbeat and happy sort of tone and shift, and it happens every time that happens. And I think with metal, you start to get more into the industrial and the weird and the darker dystopian sort of sounds, because it just kind of, it's a way to express those feelings that a lot of people are having in the current moment.
There's this band actually whose name I'm completely blanking on. They are like one of these really brutal death metal bands, and they're the ones that it's kind of like, I think it's Peeling Flesh might be their name. Yeah, they're blowing up. I think that also it's like them and,
right now.
Yeah, and of course Sanguine Sugabog, all of those bands. I think like it's interesting because you're seeing it's just this really bit crushed, intense, nasty music, and I think that again, people are just, it's like, they want to let it all out. But so I definitely think that's definitely on the up and up. Seeing them like getting so popular, I think, is a sign of that the underground community is still alive and well.
One last question I've got would be, what do you predict for the future of heavy music, and how will Bandcamp continue to play a role in this space going forward?
It's impossible to predict where metal can go because people are innovating from so many directions. I think we're seeing a lot of really great folk metal coming out right now, but we're also seeing, as we said before, a lot of experimentation. I think that we're going to definitely see a lot of music that it kind of explores the tension between technology and, raw creativity. I think that, not to sound all English majory, but it's like this strong spirit and this passion. We're going to see a lot of passion getting us through this kind of uncertainty in the world. And I think you're going to see that being explored from, a multitude of angles. I definitely think that underground communities and these scenes are going to be where the real action is happening. I think that, as we've discussed earlier, people really prize authenticity. And I think the bands that are going to break out are not going to be the bands that are trying to appeal to the biggest audiences, but the bands that are really trying to do their own thing, and they don't compromise on that. And that people will come across that organically. That's how we're going to be seeing things, really on like a grassroots level. Festivals are in a weird position right now, but I really do think that, it's going to be local. And I think it's more reason so than ever to check, look up city tags on Bandcamp. Our Discover feature is something that I think goes underutilized a lot, because really seeing what's going on in your local scene can really open up a ton of doors to bands that are right in your backyard that you never knew. We have an amazing metal columnist, Brad Sanders, who also runs a radio show. And he is always on the hunt for really new bands and really like fresh metal that I think would get overlooked by most people. And I think that in that sense, it's really just spotlighting again the diversity, that there's so many directions it could go. But the one thing holding it all together is really just a commitment to the craft and an appreciation. And from my side, what I tend to keep doing is just listening to a ton of metal, spreading it around to as many folks I can, writing about it when I have the space, continuing to just try and set an example of how music communities can work in a way that, you know, benefits the artists and benefits the fans. Because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't really have metal to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I'm really stoked that at least you and Bandcamp generally have like this specific focus and this mindset. I think it's super refreshing to hear, and I'm really excited about that.
Luna, thanks for getting this together, and Mateo, thank you once again in all of your kind words. You know, it really means a lot to us, and you know, people like you, fans like you, and the bands that you support. This is why we do what we do. So thank you.